My name is Jason, and I've always thought of myself as a practical, grounded person. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't scare easily, who finds comfort in the rational and the explainable. But lately, something has been happening that I can't explain, and it's shaken me to my core. Every night, I feel like I'm walking on the edge of something dark and unfathomable. What scares me most is that I'm not sure if I'll survive it. It started a few weeks ago, with a nightmare so vivid it felt like I was living it. Nightmares have never been a problem for me. I'd wake up, shake it off, and move on. But this one stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of that man, his grotesque grin, and those soulless, black eyes. I told myself it was just a dream, but deep down, I knew it was something more. The dream felt real, too real, like I was being pulled into another world. I could feel the cold, damp air on my skin, the rough pavement beneath my feet. Every sound, every sensation was so vivid that waking up didn't feel like an escape. It felt like I'd barely made it out alive. And even after waking, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the taxi. It was as if he had left a piece of himself behind, lingering in my thoughts. First, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was stress or something I ate before bed, I reasoned. But as the days went on, I couldn't ignore the sense of dread that followed me everywhere. I started noticing shadows moving in the corners of my vision and feeling cold spots in my house. It was like the nightmare had crossed into my waking life. The second nightmare came just as I was beginning to convince myself it was all in my head. This time it was worse. The streets were darker, the air heavier, and the man's grin even more menacing. He didn't just scare me. He made me feel like I was losing control, like my very soul was slipping away. I woke up screaming, my heart racing, and tears streaming down my face. That night, I barely got any sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. It wasn't just fear. It was a deep, paralyzing terror that left me gasping for breath. I stayed up until dawn, too afraid to let myself drift off. I told myself I'd never let him find me again, but I didn't know how to stop him. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. Work was a blur, conversations felt distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with me. I started researching nightmares, trying to find some logical explanation. But nothing I read could explain the vividness of my dreams or the lingering fear that haunted me long after waking. My friends noticed something was wrong. They said I looked tired, distracted, and jumpy. I tried to laugh it off, blaming it on late nights and too much coffee. But the truth was, I was terrified to tell them what was really happening. How do you explain to someone that you're being hunted in your dreams? That night, I tried to stay awake. I drank coffee, watched movies, and even cleaned my entire apartment to keep myself occupied. But no matter how hard I fought it, sleep eventually won. The moment my eyes closed, I was back on that dark street, the taxi pulling up like it had been waiting for me. My heart sank as I realized I was trapped in this nightmare again. When I woke up, I couldn't stop shaking. My body felt heavy, my chest tight, and my mind raced with the memory of his voice. The third time, "You won't wake up," he had whispered, his breath hot and rancid against my face. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a dread I'd never known before. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The fear was consuming me, making it impossible to function. I stopped answering calls, avoided friends, and spent most of my time locked in my apartment. I didn't want anyone to see how broken I'd become. I felt like a prisoner in my own mind, constantly waiting for the next attack. Nights were the worst. The silence of my apartment felt oppressive, the shadows on the walls menacing. I left all the lights on, hoping it would keep him away. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. When I fell asleep, he would find me, no matter where I was. I started questioning my sanity. Was this really happening? Or was I losing my mind? I thought about seeing a doctor, but what could I say? That a man from my nightmares was trying to kill me? They'd lock me up for sure. So, I kept it to myself, hoping I could figure it out on my own. I tried every trick I could think of to stay awake. Caffeine pills, cold showers, even pinching myself to stay alert. But no matter how hard I tried, my body always betrayed me. Sleep would come, and with it, the nightmare. It felt like a losing battle, one I was too tired to keep fighting. The more I tried to resist, the stronger he seemed to become. His image haunted me, not just in my dreams but in my waking life. I'd see his face in reflections, hear his voice in the wind, feel his presence in empty rooms. It was like he was always there, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I started keeping a journal, hoping it would help me make sense of what was happening. Every night, I'd write down every detail I could remember about the dream, every word he said, every feeling I felt. But instead of finding answers, I only found more questions. Who was he? What did he want from me? The more I wrote, the more I began to realize how little control I had. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was something much darker, much more dangerous. He wasn't just a figment of my imagination. He was real, and he was coming for me. I thought about running away, leaving everything behind and starting fresh somewhere new. But where could I go that he wouldn't find me? He wasn't bound by the rules of the real world. He existed in my dreams, and no matter where I went, he'd follow me there. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, but I didn't know what. I felt helpless, trapped in a cycle of fear and exhaustion. Every day was a battle to stay awake, and every night was a fight for my life. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel sleep pulling me under. My eyes are heavy, my body weak, and my mind is racing with thoughts of him. I don't know what will happen when I close my eyes tonight, but I'm terrified to find out. All I can do is hope that this isn't the night he finally takes me. I was back on that same street, the air cold and the street lamps flickering like they were struggling to stay alive. I tried to avoid the taxi this time, refusing to even look its way as it approached. My heart pounded as I hurried down the uneven pavement, trying to convince myself I could escape the inevitable. But the car's engine purred ominously as it slowed down beside me, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I froze, unable to move as the door creaked open, inviting me in like a trap set perfectly for its prey. Against every ounce of logic screaming in my head, my legs moved toward the car. It was as if an unseen force had taken control, pulling me closer to the very thing I was running from. The driver didn't say a word this time. He just sat there, grinning that horrifying grin. His sunken eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hand trembled as it reached for the door handle, and the moment I stepped inside, the air grew thick and suffocating again. As the car moved, I noticed the streets seemed different, unfamiliar and twisted, like they belonged to another world. The driver didn't ask for my destination this time. He simply drove, his face distorted by the shadows cast from the dim overhead light. I couldn't muster the courage to speak, my throat dry and my mind racing with fear. The windows of the taxi were pitch black, reflecting only my terrified expression. My chest tightened as I realized I had no way of knowing where he was taking me. Suddenly, the driver spoke, his voice sending chills down my spine. "Do you know what's waiting for you?" he asked, his tone mocking yet devoid of emotion. His question hung in the air, unanswered, as I struggled to find my voice. The taxi seemed to pick up speed, the scenery outside blurring into a dark, incomprehensible void. My fingers gripped the seat beneath me, my knuckles turning white as I braced for whatever was coming next. All I could do was pray silently that this nightmare would end soon. Without warning, the car jerked to a halt, throwing me forward against the seatbelt. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by an endless expanse of darkness. The driver turned to face me, his grin stretching wider, almost splitting his face in half. "This is where you belong," he said, his voice echoing like a distorted recording. The door locks clicked open, but my body was paralyzed. unable to move despite the overwhelming urge to run. The driver stepped out of the car and motioned for me to follow, his long, bony finger beckoning me forward. His silhouette was barely visible against the dark backdrop, but his presence was suffocatingly real. My legs trembled as I stepped out, the ground beneath me feeling unstable, almost like it was shifting with each step. He walked ahead, leading me toward a dim light flickering in the distance. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I was powerless to resist his command. As we approached the light, I saw a structure, a decrepit, crumbling house that seemed to breathe with the darkness around it. The walls were covered in strange symbols that pulsed faintly, glowing like embers in the night. The driver stopped at the door, turning to me with a grin that sent waves of nausea through my stomach. "Go inside," he ordered, his voice dripping with malice. My heart raced as I hesitated, but his unblinking stare left me no choice but to comply. The moment I stepped inside, the air grew heavier, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. The walls seemed to close in, covered with photographs of unfamiliar faces, all of them screaming in silent agony. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, each step echoing like a warning. In the center of the room was a chair, and on it sat a figure draped in shadow, its features indistinguishable. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, cold and unrelenting. The figure spoke, its voice a distorted amalgamation of whispers and growls. "You've come back to me," it said, its tone both mocking and triumphant. My body felt like it was no longer my own, my movements slow and robotic as I was drawn closer to the chair. The driver stood behind me, his grin a permanent fixture as he watched in silent amusement. The figure extended a hand, its fingers unnaturally long and clawed, motioning for me to sit in the chair. My heart pounded in protest, but my body obeyed without question. As I sat, the chair seemed to come alive, its wooden arms curling around mine like vines. The figure leaned forward, its face finally coming into view. A hollow, skeletal visage with deep, black pits where its eyes should have been. It grinned at me, its teeth jagged and uneven, stained with something dark and foul. "Do you remember me now?" it asked, its voice seeping into my mind like poison. Tears streamed down my face as memories I didn't recognize flooded my mind, each one more horrifying than the last. The room around me began to change, the walls dissolving into darkness and the floor vanishing beneath my feet. I was floating in a void, the only constants being the figure before me and the driver standing silently behind. The figure's grin widened as it spoke again. "This is your true home. You cannot escape it." Its words echoed in my mind, filling me with a hopelessness so profound it felt like my very soul was being crushed. As the figure's hand reached out toward my chest, I felt a searing pain, like my heart was being ripped from my body. My screams went unheard, swallowed by the void around me. The driver laughed, his voice sharp and cruel, cutting through the darkness like a blade. "You belong to us now," he said, his grin matching that of the figure. The pain intensified, and I felt myself slipping away, my consciousness fading into the void. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the void shifted, and I was suddenly back on the same street where it all began. The cold air hit my face, and the flickering street lamps cast their eerie glow. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath, my chest aching as if something vital had been torn from me. The taxi was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I turned around, half expecting the driver or the figure to appear, but the street was eerily empty. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to move, every step accompanied by the crushing weight of dread. The world around me seemed off, too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath. Shadows danced on the edges of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every now and then, I would hear faint whispers, too low to make out but unmistakably sinister. My pace quickened, fueled by the primal urge to get as far away as possible. As I turned a corner, I found myself face to face with the taxi once again. It was parked under a broken street lamp, its headlights off and its engine silent. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through me, and I froze, unable to decide whether to run or confront the nightmare head-on. The driver wasn't inside, but the car seemed alive, its frame subtly vibrating as though it were breathing. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my feet remained rooted to the ground. The passenger door creaked open on its own, an unspoken invitation that made my skin crawl. My body trembled, torn between the overwhelming fear and a strange compulsion to approach. I took a hesitant step back, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging me forward. The air around the taxi shimmered like a heat wave, distorting the space and making it impossible to look away. Against my will, I found myself moving closer, my hands clenching into fists in a futile attempt to resist. As I peered inside, the interior was pitch black, darker than it should have been. It was as if the car contained an endless void, ready to swallow me whole. The whispers transformed into voices, each one distinct yet speaking in unison, their words incomprehensible but laced with malice. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, metal frame of the door. The moment my hand made contact, I felt a surge of energy, and the world around me dissolved into darkness once again. I was no longer on the street. I stood in a cavernous, shadow-filled room, the walls lined with countless doors. Each door was different, some old and rotting, others polished and new, but all of them radiated an aura of dread. The voices were louder now, coming from every direction, their words forming a chaotic symphony that filled my head. One door in particular caught my attention. It was massive, made of blackened iron, with deep scratches etched into its surface. The whispers guided me toward the door, and I reached out despite the terror clawing at my chest. My fingers barely grazed the handle when the door burst open, releasing a torrent of freezing air that knocked me back. From the darkness beyond, the figure emerged, its skeletal form towering over me. Its grin was wider than ever, its teeth gleaming in the dim light as it slowly advanced. "You should have stayed awake," it hissed, its voice dripping with venom. The ground beneath me shifted, and I was falling, plummeting into an endless abyss. The figure hovered above, watching me with those empty, black eyes that seemed to consume everything. I screamed, but no sound came out, my voice lost to the void. My mind raced, desperate for a way to escape, but the darkness offered no reprieve. The figure's laughter echoed around me, a cruel reminder of my helplessness. Just as I was about to give in to despair, a faint light appeared below me, growing brighter with each passing second. The figure's laughter turned to a snarl, and it lunged toward me, its clawed hands reaching out. The light enveloped me, and I felt a sudden jolt as my body hit solid ground. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my bedroom, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The room was deathly silent, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, its glowing numbers mocking me with the realization that only a few minutes had passed since I'd fallen asleep. My heart sank as I noticed something on the floor, a single blackened claw mark etched into the wooden boards. The mark seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. A deep sense of unease settled over me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the mark. The moment I touched it, a sharp pain shot through my hand, and I recoiled in shock. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my mind with their insidious chorus. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I backed away from the mark. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my vision blurred as panic set in. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, shifting and writhing like living things. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was conspiring against me, trapping me within its walls. As I turned back toward the center of the room, the figure was there, its hollow eyes staring into mine. It grinned, its jagged teeth glinting in the faint light. "You can't escape me," it said, its voice a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. I knew then that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. As time passed, the haunting experiences I endured became a part of me, shaping my outlook on life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Though the witch's presence was gone, her memory lingered like a scar, a permanent mark on my soul. I've tried to find meaning in what happened, to understand why I was chosen, but the answers remain elusive. All I know is that I survived something that could have easily consumed me, and for that, I'm grateful. Talking about my experience hasn't been easy. Every time I recount it, the fear and the sensations come rushing back, as vivid as the night they first occurred. But sharing it with others has also been healing. I've connected with people who've faced their own darkness, who've wrestled with forces they couldn't explain, and I've realized that I'm not alone. The world is full of stories like mine, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The nightmares still visit me from time to time, shadows of the witch's lingering power. In those moments, I remind myself that I broke her hold, that her curse no longer controls me. It's a small comfort, but one that helps me push through the fear. The nights are no longer as terrifying as they once were, though they still carry a weight, a reminder of the battle I fought and won. I've taken steps to protect myself from ever experiencing something like this again. I've learned about the importance of boundaries, of respecting forces I don't understand, and of trusting my instincts. The world is full of mysteries, and while some are worth exploring, others are better left untouched. It's a hard lesson, but one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. This ordeal has also taught me to value the people in my life. My friends and family, though unaware of the full extent of my struggles, have been a source of comfort and stability. Their support reminded me that even in the darkest times, we are never truly alone. It's a lesson I hold onto tightly, a beacon of light in the shadows that sometimes threaten to overwhelm me. As I move forward, I've decided to channel my experience into something positive. I've started writing about what happened, hoping to raise awareness about the unseen forces that can affect our lives. It's not about scaring people, but about reminding them to be cautious, to trust their instincts, and to respect the unknown. If my story can help even one person avoid a similar fate, then it will have been worth it. The witch may have been a part of my past, but she no longer defines my future. I've reclaimed my life, piece by piece, finding joy in the little things I once took for granted. A sunrise, a conversation, a quiet moment of peace. These are the things that matter, the things that remind me of what it means to be alive. Every now and then, I feel a pang of fear, a fleeting moment of doubt that she might return. But I refuse to let that fear control me. I faced her once, and I know I'm strong enough to face her again if I have to. Fear is powerful, but it's not invincible. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm struck by how much I've changed. I'm not the same person I was before that night in the cabin. I'm stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the world around me. The experience tested me in ways I never imagined, but it also revealed a resilience I didn't know I had. To anyone reading this who might be facing their own darkness, I want you to know that you're not alone. The journey may be hard, and the fear may feel insurmountable, but there is always a way forward. Hold on to hope, lean on those you trust, and remember that you are stronger than you think. If I can face my nightmare and come out on the other side, so can you. The story of the witch is one I'll carry with me forever, a reminder of the fragility of our reality and the strength we possess to endure. It's a chapter in my life, but it's not the whole book. I've turned the page, ready to write the next chapter, one filled with hope, growth, and the promise of a brighter future. The figure's words echoed in my mind long after it vanished, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of my room. My breathing was ragged, and my body trembled as I tried to process what had just happened. The claw mark on the floor remained, a permanent reminder that this was no ordinary nightmare. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my head in my hands, wondering if I would ever feel safe again. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a battleground. Every fiber of my being ached from the struggle, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. The figure's warning haunted me. The third time, I wouldn't wake up. It wasn't just a dream, it was a countdown, and I was running out of time. I stayed awake for as long as I could, forcing myself to keep my eyes open even as exhaustion clawed at me. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the nightmare, searching for some clue or weakness in the creature's power. But all I could see were its empty, black eyes and that grin, stretching impossibly wide. The hours dragged on, each second a torment as I fought the urge to sleep. I tried everything to stay awake. Cold water, loud music, pacing the room, but my body was betraying me. My eyelids grew heavier, and my thoughts became sluggish. I couldn't hold out much longer. Desperation set in, and I turned to the only thing I could think of: research. I scoured the internet for anything resembling my experience, combing through forums, articles, and videos about sleep paralysis, nightmares, and supernatural encounters. To my shock, I found others who described eerily similar figures in their dreams. They called it the Grinning Man, a malevolent entity that preyed on people through their nightmares. The stories were chillingly familiar: locked doors, distorted faces, and the same ominous warning. Some claimed to have survived by sheer willpower, while others simply disappeared, their accounts ending abruptly. The more I read, the more hopeless I felt. There was no clear way to defeat it, no guaranteed method to escape its grasp. But one thing became clear: the Grinning Man thrived on fear. It fed off the terror it instilled, growing stronger with every nightmare. Armed with this knowledge, I resolved to face it head-on if it came for me again. Fear had been my downfall before, and I couldn't let it win. I began to mentally prepare myself, practicing lucid dreaming techniques and repeating affirmations of strength and control. When sleep finally claimed me, I was ready, or so I thought. The dream began differently this time, with me standing in a vast, empty field under a blood-red sky. The air was thick with tension, and I knew he was near. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm, reminding myself that this was my dream, my realm. The Grinning Man appeared in the distance, his towering form casting a long shadow across the field. He moved slowly at first, his grotesque grin widening as he drew closer. I stood my ground, refusing to let the fear take hold. "You don't control me," I said, my voice steady despite the terror bubbling beneath the surface. The creature stopped, its hollow eyes narrowing as if sizing me up. For a moment, I thought it might actually back down. But then, it let out a guttural laugh, the sound reverberating through the air like a death knell. It lunged at me, its twisted limbs moving with unnatural speed. I braced myself, focusing all my energy on taking control of the dream. "This is my world," I shouted, and the field around me began to shift. The ground shook, and the blood-red sky turned to a brilliant gold. The Grinning Man hesitated, its form flickering as if it were struggling to maintain its presence. Summoning every ounce of courage, I imagined a barrier between us, a wall of light that the creature couldn't penetrate. Clawed at the barrier, its grin faltering for the first time. The realization hit me: it was afraid. I pushed harder, envisioning the light consuming it, erasing its existence from my mind. The Grinning Man let out a final, ear-piercing shriek before dissolving into nothingness. The dreamscape stabilized, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of peace. I woke up moments later, the sunlight streaming through my window like a beacon of hope. Though the Grinning Man was gone, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I knew the fight wasn't over, that he might return someday, but I also knew I had the strength to face him. Nightmares may come, but they no longer hold the same power over me. And if he ever warns me again, I'll be ready.